Okay, I was wrong. Master of Harmony is actually performing extremely well right now, and we're seeing a pretty big shift from players primarily playing Shado-pan to a nice 50-50, maybe depending on key level, comfort level, etc. But Master of Harmony is definitely a valuable and viable choice now. And in this video, I just want to kind of talk about just the spec and the hero talent in general. So let's just dive right in. So last night on stream, I was doing a bunch of 11s and 12s, attempting some of my first 12s of the season while also kind of farming and rolling up 11s. And I decided to play Master of Harmony for a few of these keys after Twitch chat said that Mordrim happened to be playing it. So I went over to Raider.io and I checked it out. Now, at first, I was a little skeptical, but if we come over here, I thought I was kind of being trolled, but if we come over here to the general kind of tank leaderboard, at least for Brewmaster Monk specifically, we can see the list of pretty much everyone who's currently, quote-unquote, pushing keys. So we're going to go check out Mordrim really quick, and I noticed that he is playing Master of Harmony. And so this got me kind of thinking, I'm like, okay, the top brewmaster's playing it, but maybe is he just happens to be spec'd into it while he's logged out? So I started looking at some of his keys. 3 hours ago, he actually did a run where he was, in fact, playing Mantra of Purity with Wave of 1,000 Strikes. He was playing this quote-unquote worst build, or the worst hero talent tree. I always knew Master of Harmony was okay, but it had a lot of it has a lot of issues, right? It has a bottlenecking issue with damage where when you actually try to expel your, I guess, your stored vitality, what's going to end up happening is that you're not going to generate any more stored vitality while you're trying to expend. So then there's a problem with if you try to use your cooldowns inside of that window, you're missing out. That's obviously a huge issue. There's also a just some general issues with lower end scaling with how Clarity of Purpose works, as well as Mantra of Purity. But the recent buffs to the damage profile of this hero talent that happened this week has made this actually pretty viable. And in higher content, you actually tend to expel a lot of this vitality that's stored up pretty rapidly because we just have higher, main stats. The pulls are generally bigger. So generally the bottlenecking issue becomes less of an issue. And there's actually some really cool tricks you can do. So this is what the build looks like that Mordrim has been playing. I've been playing something somewhat similar. I don't think I'm actually playing Strike at Dawn, for example. I think I actually end up taking things like Zen Med and then putting this extra point into Determination, which makes Stagger extremely effective. And when your Stagger is extremely effective, it actually has an interesting interaction with Mantra of Purity because you're staggering more, then you're purifying more, leading to just generally more kind of defensive value in terms of that cooldown, but definitely not worth or not needed to run. So I didn't want to go through every single brewmaster because I was like, okay, Mordrim's obviously playing it, but are other brewmasters playing it? I kind of started going down the list and it looked like a lot of people were still playing Shado-pan. So at first I was like, oh, maybe it's a one-off, but let me jump over to something like Murloc. So then what ended up happening today is I was like, okay, it was fun playing it on stream last night. It's clearly good. And I timed my first 2 12s as Master of Harmony, which was not something I expected to do when I woke up in the morning. But I tried looking on Archon. Archon's API or APL doesn't really update all that frequently. It updates every week. So according to that, it's 90% of people are still playing Shado-pan. But if you come over to Murloc, I think their site updates much more often. And it calculates the top 50 monks compared to kind of just a top percentage, which generally ends up being more than 50. So you might have some players mixed in there who just aren't really working against what might be meta. But you can start kind of looking through and you can see what players are being included, but we're going to pretty much include all of the top 5. Nothing's really changing in terms of secondary stats. Verse, still the best thing you can stack. Critical Strike, you want to aim for 30. That's the first breakpoint. Anything past 30 generally isn't wanted because you hit that first diminishing return, and a 10% diminishing return on crit ends up being worse than something like Versatility, for example. In Versatility, to hit that first DR, there's a much higher ceiling in order to hit that. Even with 15,000 stats on Verse, you're only seeing a 19%. Obviously, the first diminishing return comes in at 30%. So we have a long way to go before we hit that ceiling. Anyways, as we kind of scroll down and look, I wanted to see what the difference was in the top 50. So you can actually see here that 28% of the top 50 are playing Shado-pan, and you can actually see it's Itrikaso, Equinox, Flappy Brew, Big Crusher, and then some Russian name that I can't pronounce are the top 5 users of this. And then when you look over here, you're seeing Mordrim, Jonda, Tobek, Chunile, and even I don't know. I'm not even gonna pretend that I'm gonna try to pronounce it. But anyways, what's interesting is that we're seeing actually more of a 50-50 split, which I think is very unique, because I was so sold on you'll never play Master of Harmony past 12s because you don't have something like predictive training available to you. And if you don't have predictive training available, it's a flat 10% DR typically while you're tanking trash. If you're tanking like bosses, sometimes you won't have full uptime on this because sometimes auto attacks don't come in as frequently. You may not dodge an attack for some period of time because of X, Y, and Z factor. Or there's like spell queuing, for example. So most of the time you're seeing like an 85 to 90% uptime on predictive training compared to like the 100% that I think people will argue. But generally it's about 100% where it matters. Because brewmasters and single target on bosses generally are very fine because we have insane defensives and staggers OP. Nonetheless, I think I now am like seeing a different I'm seeing Master of Harmony in like a different light, because while you might not have upfront damage reduction, our stagger in this current season compared to the first season of Dragonflight is much, much higher. Compared to like Dragonflight, where we're staggering maybe up to 50 or so percent of our stagger, we're now staggering closer to like 70. And this is only the first season, so this is only going to scale better with main stat. Obviously, there's diminishing returns on main stat providing stagger value. Typically, we'll cap out around the 85-90% mark. Won't go too much higher than that. Even like 85 is a stretch, actually, so ignore that 90 part. But basically, Mantra of Purity allows you to, instead of purifying 50% of your stagger, it's purifying 60% of your stagger. So while it's not maybe an upfront flat value or damage reduction, you are going to be able to purify the amount that you're able to stagger. So you're aiming for like high main stat, you're aiming for things like, it makes things like high tolerance a lot more valuable, because now you're just flat out staggering more and you can now purify more stagger, and you're going to get a little bit of healing after purifying, which is great. Clarity of Purpose is also good. So it's going to basically store additional vitality whenever you cast Purifying Brew, which is great. And the damage components of these tooltips aren't updated, but Overwhelming Force got a massive buff, as well as Manifestation. Chi Wave, and more importantly, Chi Burst, is now doing 100% increased damage compared to the 50 that it was before. So it is absolutely obliterating packs. Every 30 seconds, you have this massive CD that's doing a ton of damage, and it feeds really well into Vitality, which allows you to expel this damage. What's really cool about this, and I don't necessarily recommend it, or it's very niche, but what you can do is, before going into a boss, just like we saw maybe in the early weeks of the season when people were doing this in like heroic dungeons, you store a ton of Vitality up, you go into a boss with pretty much your full health pool worth of damage. Basically, you're starting the fight with a touch of death, you roll in with like an 80% Vitality shield, or 90% or 100% that's fully capped, you pop Celestial Brew, and you immediately shoot up to like 1 million, DPS, and you're sustaining that, you're out damaging people, and it feels very, very good. So I find this really interesting because it plays into a more defensive build, and while you're still stacking crit verse, we are seeing a slight shift in what talents we're running. So like we just viewed on Mordrim, he's opting, especially in like 14s, because he's the highest monk in the world, he's opting into a much more defensive build through things like Ox Stance and Heightened Guard, and he's dropping talents like Counter Strike and Facepalm, which is really interesting. Picking up Quick Sip as well, it shifts all of the defensive value. Instead of having this flat DR from predictive training in the Shado-pan tree, you're focusing everything into stagger reduction, and increasing your stacker's effectiveness. So of course, things like high tolerance is a good play, but not only purifying more, but also having additional things like Quick Sip on top of Tranquil Spirit means that you are taking a lot of damage to the face, and then you're just purifying it, and it's just going away. And the baseline value of that mitigation ends up being about the same, if not more, than Shado-pan. And I mean, you can make an argument that they're both equally effective, right? We're seeing from Murloc.io that it's still a 28 to 22% split, but the difference of doing a 14 compared to people doing a 12, which is everyone lumped into this bracket, I think right now the site doesn't have me on it. I don't care if I'm on it or not, but I think I would be sitting, according to this list, I'd be sitting right somewhere in here around the 30. I think I'm 2754, so maybe top 30. I don't think this counts CN players, and then that's why this list is a little weird, but nonetheless, I'm wondering what the representation is going to be when you're looking at just the top 5 to 10 players, because with the top 50, I mean, 2730, this is still 11s with 2 chests across the board. And this isn't really even diving into 12s yet. The disparity between the bottom, which is, rank 50, compared to the top, which is now going to be like rank 1 is 3k, you're seeing people running 12s compared to 14s, and that gap between the two is much higher. So it's interesting to me that Master of Harmony ends up actually being just as, if not better, than Shado-pan. Now, time will tell. We still have a long way to go in terms of this patch, I guess, because, we're far away from max item level. Does it show here what people's item levels are? Mordrum is up there almost at 630, with Janata sitting at 626. I'm around 626, but you're going to see most of these players between 626 and 627. Max item level is going to be close to 639, if not, yeah, I mean, basically right there, never mind. But we still have like 10 to 13 item levels to go before we're actually capped out. So it'll be interesting to see what it's going to end up being or playing at once we get to the end of the season. But it's awesome. It's very good to see two very competitive hero talents. I think you could still play both. I don't know if one is easier than the other. There's nuances to both in terms of keeping track of your Master of Harmony buff or your Shado-pan buffs, and kind of on the fly deciding what buttons you may or may not hit to optimize damage for specific pulls. Maybe not spending energy at the end of a pull to go into a pull with a big, flurry strikes, or not popping Celestial Brew towards the end of the pull, relying on your healer or kiting so you can store your vitality to use it on a boss fight where the prio damage is important. Overall, it's just really interesting. I think it's awesome. I'm going to be playing Master of Harmony a lot more because honestly, I just prefer it. I'm not a fan of Shado-pan. I kind of just played it because it was better for a long time. Now, I will say this. In the 10.5, or sorry, the 11.0.5 patch, which is coming up next week, Shado-pan is getting some slight changes. Your Wisdom of the Wall buff isn't going to last as long, but it's going to proc more often because they're reducing the energy expenditure from 300 to 240, which is pretty massive. And they're making it so you can track it as an aura. It's going to be a trackable buff now that is just in the base game, and you can use Weak Horse to track it, of course. But Spitting Grain Kick will now actually generate that energy for you. So Flurry Strikes are going to feel a little bit better to use. So it might end up swinging back to Flurry Strikes in the next week or two, but time will tell. Anyways, I hope this video kind of makes sense. It's very interesting to kind of talk about. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace.